Let's make sauerkraut. I harvested these 5 heads of cabbage from the garden a few weeks ago, and while we love cabbage, there's no way we can eat all of these before they go bad. My favorite way to preserve cabbage is by making sauerkraut, which is a ferment. Adding fermented foods to your diet improves gut health and digestion, and sauerkraut is high in vitamin K, which your body really needs for blood clotting and to heal wounds and to keep your bones strong and healthy. The first thing I'm going to do is remove the outer leaves of the cabbage, but I'm going to save a couple of these, and I'll show you why a little later. Then I'm going to cut the core out of the cabbage and discard that. You can cut your cabbage up any way you like, but it needs to be in fairly small pieces. You can shred it very finely, a lot of people do, but I just cut mine really small. I only used 3 heads of cabbage, and I weighed them before I started because I wanted to start with about 5 pounds. That's all the pan that I'm going to use will hold. You do need to know the weight in order to know how much salt you'll need. You'll need to use 1 tablespoon of salt for every pound of cabbage. If you use coarsely ground salt, you'll need 2 tablespoons per pound of cabbage, and you want to use good salt. I'm using Redmond's real salt, but I have used Morton's table salt before and it worked fine. Just use what you have. You just can't reduce the salt because it plays a crucial role in the fermentation process. The salt not only flavors the sauerkraut, but it acts as a preservative, creating an environment that encourages the growth of beneficial bacteria while inhibiting the growth of bad bacteria. The salt is also going to draw the liquid out of our vegetables while preserving the texture. Once I have the salt added, I massage that into the cabbage and let it sit for a while, allowing that salt time to draw the water out. You can use a kraut pounder for this, but I don't have one, so this is how I do it. Now you can add all kinds of things to sauerkraut, or you can just have plain cabbage, but I like to add carrots at the very least. I like the sweetness that they add. And I have some I just harvested from the greenhouse, and I've peeled and grated them in my food processor. This is about 5 cups, so I'm using about 1 cup for every pound of cabbage. I mix this in really well to the cabbage. I'm going to allow this to sit until there's a good bit of liquid or brine in the bottom of my pan. Okay, this has been sitting for about 30 minutes, and you can see it has created quite a bit of brine, so I'm ready to put it in my jars. You can use all kinds of containers for this. I would recommend using glass. So mason jars are perfect for fermenting, especially anaerobic fermentation, because you're easily able to create an anaerobic environment. And for that reason, you don't want to use an oversized container because you want to have as little air as possible inside that container. I'm going to pack the veggies into the jars as tightly as I can. A kraut pounder again would be perfect for this, but I make do with the handle of a wooden spoon that's flat on one end. You could also just use your fist. You want your hands to be very clean, and that's good enough. The reason I'm wearing gloves is because I have some nicks on my hands. I always do. It's just a hazard of living on a farm, and salt on cuts is not pleasant. Now for those outer leaves I saved, I'm going to use a piece that's large enough to cover the top of my vegetables, and this will keep all the little pieces from floating. You want to keep everything below the brine. I had to do a little redistributing to keep from having a large headspace in that smaller jar. You want a little space to keep the brine from bubbling out of the jar during the fermentation process, but not so much space that your ferment will struggle to push all the oxygen out. And I'm going to hold everything down with these springs. These were part of the ball fermentation kit that my husband bought for me a few years ago. Until then, I mostly used a jelly jar or an upside down regular size plastic lid to hold everything below the brine. Just use what you have. And the same applies to the lids you use. You can use a regular canning lid and ring. I'm using the lids that came in the fermentation kit, and they have this little gasket that allows air to escape but doesn't allow air to come back inside the jar. Whatever you use, it needs to be airtight, and if it doesn't allow air to escape, then you'll just need to burp it once a day or so. What happens is the fermentation process produces primarily carbon dioxide, and that will push the oxygen out of the jar. You need an oxygenless environment for the growth of the beneficial bacteria. So you'll let this sit in a warm spot in your kitchen for anywhere from 3 to 30 days. You'll see bubbles, that's normal, and it indicates that fermentation is happening. After I made this, we had another cold snap, and we do not keep our house super warm in the winter. So after a week of sitting on my counter, this ferment had not really been active. Ferments prefer temperatures from 75 to 80 degrees, so the sauerkraut has not developed at this point. So I borrowed a heating pad from my husband's winemaking making supplies and kept my jars around 76 degrees for the next 7 days. And when I tested it again, it was perfect. The warmer your home is, the faster the vegetables will ferment. I've made this in warmer months and had it ready in as little as 3 days. The longer it sits out, it won't go bad, it just gets more sour as more lactic acid is produced. So when your kraut is ready, really depends on your personal taste. When it's where you want it, simply remove the cover leaves, the weight, and the fermentation lid, if you're using one, and store it in the refrigerator. The cold slows down the fermentation almost to a halt, and this will keep in the refrigerator for a really long time, as long as it doesn't freeze, which will kill the bacteria and defeat the purpose of the fermentation. If you've never had homemade kraut, I highly encourage you to give it a try, even if you don't like store-bought kraut, because it is not the same. In fact, I didn't even think I liked sauerkraut until I made it for myself.